It's coming from a hard left liberal ideology that's detached from reality. And really and truly, I mean, if this crowd get their way, we'll be the ones eating grass and insects. I mean, what they're saying does not hold up.
So the Irish Farmers Association is after releasing figures where they claim that just 7 institutions or facilities produce the same amount of CO2 emissions as about 70% of Ireland's national dairy herd. I think something like Dublin Airport, several cement plants, that kind of thing. And the argument I think they were trying to make is that farmers do not produce significantly more emissions than other kinds of industries, yet they are kind of disproportionately targeted, I think was the point they were trying to make. Would you agree with that assessment?
Oh, 100%. I've said that all along. I think anybody with a grain of common sense before they see any report would know that for fact, that farmers are actually doing great work in terms of the environment, in terms of sequestration of carbon. And there's a lot of work that's unacknowledged, but they are being definitely scapegoated and demonised, no doubt about it. I think a lot of the environmental NGOs, they just want to stop all farming, full stop. That's their agenda. And we're seeing these great globalists, talking about other countries and the way other countries are affected and whatnot by weather cycles. But what they're not worried about is food security, or indeed the possibility of famine in those countries. So I think it's telling that, these globalists are so hypocritical, really. They care about one issue, but they don't care about people starving in other countries, and that's clearly what's happening. Our farmers do great work in terms of the environment, and certainly aviation is responsible for a huge volume of emissions. They don't want to know about that. And I think, it's high time that the rural government TDs in there sat up and started to take notice of what's happening, and also stood up for their constituents, many of whom are farming families. They need to do that, because if they take the rural electorate for granted, they could be pleasantly surprised the next time, because I don't think farmers are going to take much more of it, and that comes from me speaking to them firsthand. They've taken enough. The calculations set at 25% in terms of what they have to do, and they're expected to do more all of the time, while we see other areas like aviation not having to do anything. But of course that would suit Eamon Ryan very well, being a Dublin-based TD. It would suit the Green Agenda very well, and it would suit the globalists very well also. We saw them flying in and out in their jets to the COP27. Isn't it a pity they don't have a bit of COP? But crazy stuff, like really crazy stuff what's happening.
Last week we were just outside the Dáil here interviewing several Extinction Rebellion protesters who are arguing that Ireland needs to take even more drastic climate measures and so on in advance of the COP27 meeting. And what many of them said to us was that not only should farming be restricted, but it should be banned outright by law, cattle farming and livestock farming and so on. And one gentleman was telling us that if everyone went vegan and we were to grow plant-based crops, you would be able to get a lot more bang for your buck, was his argument. He said that the amount of grass it takes to feed a cow is far more, and if you planted potatoes or whatever else it might be, you could grow more crops and actually feed more people from a food security perspective. What would you think of something like that?
Well, who are Extinction Rebellion? Never heard of them before. I don't think they're very relevant. Certainly, look at a lot of these crowds are popping up here, there and everywhere, and they're advocating and imposing their own views on people and on society. It's coming from a hard left liberal ideology that's detached from reality. And really and truly, I mean, if this crowd get their way, we'll be the ones eating grass and insects. I mean, what they're saying does not hold up. And, we know from looking at medical evidence and hearing medical experts that meat is needed in the diet. They're ignoring all of that, but it's crazy stuff, isn't it? It's just crazy what's happening here, and I think it needs to be called out. And certainly, the nonsense that that's been trotted out, and as I said, they're happy to impose their views all of the time, but they don't want to hear any other view, or they don't want to hear any medical evidence, or they don't want to hear clinical experts who would say otherwise. It seems to be their way or no way all the time. And doesn't it just show how crazy things have got in here when some of the parties, government parties, 3 government parties, are happy to follow some of the pursuits of crowds like this. I've never heard of them before, but I just find it unbelievable. I think, common sense isn't too common, and there needs to be, a sense of realism on what's happening and a kind of a grip on reality. And I think many of these groups who are funded to the hilt by the taxpayer and shouldn't be, I have called for, particularly, and I mean this in terms of the environmental NGOs, to be defunded, because when you hear the likes of that stuff, I mean, taxpayers' money shouldn't be put into these groups.